The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for joining today's webinar, Getting the Most Out of Your IBM Cognos Environment. My name is Kristen Brown. I'm the Marketing Events Manager with Ironside. On today's call, you have myself, Carrie Rolfe, Account Executive with Ironside, and our presenter, Eric Romanek, who's the Technology Services Manager. You can connect with Ironside by tweeting us at Ironside Group. Also, you can connect with today's speaker, Eric Romanek. His email is eromanek@ironsidegroup.com. I will be monitoring all questions that come in through today's webinar. So you can just type them in as you have questions, and I'll respond to them at the end of the webinar. One thing, just to let you all know, this is a common question that comes in during the webinar, but the slide deck and replay will both be available within a couple of days. So as soon as that's ready, I'll email it out to everybody. Now I'm going to hand it over to Carrie.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Carrie Rolfe. I'm part of the sales team here at Ironside. Before we begin with Eric, I just want to take a few minutes to provide an overview of who we are. So Ironside is a premier IBM business partner. We've received multiple Partner of the Year awards over the years from IBM for our delivery expertise. As a business, we're a technology advisory consulting organization, and we specialize in business analytics and data warehousing. Our expertise spans across the entire delivery lifecycle, so we focus on areas such as analytics advisory, where we would provide data and analytics strategy, strategic roadmaps, reference architectures, and things like that. In information management, our expertise includes data integration, warehousing, governance, big data, and Hadoop. From a business intelligence perspective, we work with dashboards, reporting, mobile, data visualizations. We also have a performance management practice with deep expertise in finance, sales and operations planning, forecasting, and modeling. And then on an advanced analytics front, we work with things such as data mining, segmentation, predictive modeling, and social media analytics. So as well as these practices, we also offer we have a managed service division that offers our clients the ability to take their business analytics and information management software, and we can provide management, administration, and even hosting of those softwares. So we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. So Ironside also has the largest Cognos training practice in the country. We provide education for the entire IBM business analytics stack, and we offer that as private, public, and customized training classes, and those tend to be in business analytics, TM1, and SPSS. And then finally, from a business standpoint, we also offer remote development services, and that's providing onshore business application development, and that's here in our Lexington, Massachusetts office. So what do we do? So basically, as a business, Ironside is helping organizations work with their data. We apply advisory services and products to their data and help generate better business insight so that we can increase business outcomes such as increased profits or increased revenue. So just looking at Ironside quick by numbers, we were founded in 1999. We were a Cognos business partner prior to IBM acquiring Cognos in 2008. We have over 100 employees, and we have over 500 clients across multiple industries. We are headquartered in Lexington, Massachusetts, as I mentioned, with offices in Atlanta, Austin, Cleveland, Detroit, Philadelphia, and New York. So as I mentioned, we offer a managed service offering. That's available as two options, as you can see here, core and complete. If an organization is interested in using their own hardware, we can work with them on-premise, and that's the Ironside core offering. If you'd prefer the complete solution, we can host your software on IBM's soft layer services. The two key services to note here is both of the managed service offerings provide performance monitoring and tuning and fixed pack application and version upgrades. We find that something that a lot of our clients are very interested in. So at this point, I'd just like to hand things over to Eric Romanek.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Eric Romanek. I've been working in IT for 17 years, and I've been working at Ironside for 3. And today we're going to talk about how to get the most out of your Cognos BI environment. And we're going to basically really going to focus on 3 separate tips. One has to do with Cognos and cookies and an error that probably every developer and administrator has seen at some time or another when they're working with Cognos. We're going to talk about dynamic query mode locking and tuning. And then we're just going to talk about generally tuning your Cognos environment. When we're done with that, we're going to talk about what Ironside can do to help you, and if you guys can save all of your questions till the end, that would be great. Just if you have a question that comes up while we're in the middle of it, just type it into your chat window, and our moderator will keep track of that, and we'll make sure that we get it answered at the end. Thank you very much. All right. So let's talk about tweaking and tuning your environment. So anybody that's worked with Cognos for any period of time knows that when you're working in one environment, say development, and you then try and connect to a second environment, say production, especially if you're using single sign-on, but almost always you end up getting this dreaded DPR error 2107. And basically the conversation here is, this comes with Internet Explorer and Firefox, and what happens is, to get around it, you have to either dump your browser, like close it and open a new session back up, or you have to basically start a new session in IE. The reason for this is because Cognos uses cookies to track who you are in the application. And what happens is your development cookie looks different than your production cookie because the first half of that cookie is the server identification. So when you connect to production from dev, Cognos basically shows up and says, I see that cookie, but that's not who I think it is. And it gives you the 2107 error. There actually is a way to fix this. And it's a way that, honestly, I found, and I haven't been able to find again. IBM had it up on their website for a couple of weeks, and then they took it down. But basically what you can do is if you go into Cognos configuration and you go to the global configuration settings, you can basically label the cookie that you're giving to the client machines when they connect via their browser. And so what you're going to do here is you have a couple of different options. And basically what you want to do is find a way to identify the server that you're on. So in this case, you're going to use the fully qualified domain of the gateway box. In this case, we have local server.localdomain.local. This is going to be your gateway, so it could be an alias if you're using a load balancer or a DNS entry. And actually, it needs to be that alias. It can't be the local host name for the gateway box. And you're also going to specify the path here. And now what's going to happen is when you bounce back and forth between those environments, it's going to know which server that cookie is from and be able to say, oh, well, that cookie isn't the one you need. Here's the one you need for this environment. So just some notes and ramifications on this. All of these configurations are done at the gateway servers. In a load balance environment, you're going to use whatever the virtual IP instance is of that host name. You're going to use any host name changes that you make in the environment will need to be reflected here as well. So this adds some complexity to your reconfiguration of your environment. So if you decide, say you start out with reporting at ironsidegroup.com and you wanted to change it to business reporting at ironsidegroup.com, you not only have to change the alias in DNS, but you also have to change it here. If you don't change it here, you will end up with Cognos application firewall errors that will hamper your ability to get into the environment properly. Also, this can make individual gateway testing challenging. So if you have multiple gateways, say you have 2 behind a load balancer, if you try to connect directly to one and it bounces you, or even if it doesn't bounce you, you can end up with CAF errors when you try to do administrative tasks, because it's going to say, well, your cookie doesn't say that you're from the load balancer, or it says you're coming from a load balancer, but you're coming through a specific task. So you just need to be aware that this is going to make some of your testing challenging, but it does make your day-to-day use of the environment a lot more straightforward. All right. Let's talk about dynamic query mode database locking. This actually came up for a client of mine. They were doing ETL loads of their database, and what they were running into is that their Cognos environment was locking their database, so they couldn't do writes to the database. And so in their case, they were using DQM exclusively, and it was preventing their ETL jobs from finishing. And it would basically just show up as a block. As you can see, that's a list of the jobs that were backed up waiting to finish up. And most of those had to do with the Cognos service itself. The resolution here is that you can set the isolation level to basically read uncommitted data. Now, obviously, you need to make sure that the data you're trying to read, this is okay. And by default, you can make this change directly at the data source level, which is nice, and it's very straightforward for CQM. But the problem is that DQM doesn't recognize the CQM configuration. So what you have to do is you basically have to use the command entries down below. So on each of these data source pages, there's that command section at the bottom that when you expand it, it comes up with 4 different sets, and you have to basically modify the connection set to allow the read of uncommitted data through JDBC. And the link here in the presentation will give you the details of that. This particular sample was for a SQL Server connection, but basically all you're doing is giving the same command of reading uncommitted through XML scripts to allow the JDBC connection to do what it needs to do. All right, so let's get to what you guys, one of the things you guys are really here for. Let's talk about tuning your platform. So we're going to set a baseline here just so we all are on the same page. We're going to be talking about Cognos 10 BI instances. And what we're really looking at here is, listen, I have a system, it's not responding quickly, I have long wait times for reports. And there are lots of potential factors for this issue, right? It could be poorly written reports, it could be inefficient frameworks, it could be a poorly performing data source. But today we're going to focus on system configuration and usage. So let's start, when I look at this in on a couple of different tiers. So let's start with configuration. So in the case of configuration, what you really need to know is the bitness of your installation. Most installations of Cognos 10 are 64-bit at this point. Everything basically since 10.2.1 defaults almost entirely to 64-bit unless you actively pull down 32-bit application. But you need to know what you install. An easy way, but not always a definitive way to find out, is to look at where the application is installed. If it's in program files x86, it's 32-bit. If it's in program files, it's 64, and that's on Windows. On Linux, it's a little bit tougher to tell. On all of them, the definitive way to find this is actually to go into the install path and look at the cmp lst.txt file. But whatever you do, you want to know what the bitness is, because it's going to affect the next things that we're talking about. When we're doing bitness, we want to talk, one of the first things we want to look at is what is the maximum memory for your dispatcher. And this is basically the maximum Tomcat heap setting inside of the Cognos service itself. The default is always 768. This really isn't a good setting for production in either 32 or 64-bit. It's not enough memory. And basically what this is saying is, listen, the Java instance that runs Cognos is only going to have 768 megs of RAM. This is not enough for most 32-bit instances, And it's definitely not enough for 64-bit instances where the libraries are larger and they take up more space in RAM. If you leave it at this setting for a 64-bit instance, you will have a constant churn of memory, where it's basically, it keeps running out of memory and running processes to do garbage collection and clean that space up. In the case of 32-bit, set this right to 1024. That's pretty much the maximum you're going to be able to get to anyway, so it's a good starting point. From a 64-bit, the max is significantly higher. I believe you can get up to like 16 or 32 gigs. You might even be able to go higher than that. Start by doubling it. Take the memory setting and set it to 1535 and see how the processor utilization and the memory utilization go. And what you really want to be doing here is correlating the heat to your memory usage and system utilization. So one thing to take into account is when you're tweaking this, realize that every time you tweak this, you're basically committing more of your RAM. So when you're looking at your system, if you don't have more than if you don't have RAM available, you shouldn't increase these at all. If you only have a gig available, then you can increase these by a gig, but you want to be careful because you don't want to overtax your system and go into virtual memory. All right. Tuning your platform. So the other thing that you want to make sure that you do is you want to generate reports on the usage of your environment. So now we're getting into actual administration native to Cognos. There's really a couple of different things you need to do here. First of all, you should be asking for performance data from your IT team. In most companies, your IT team is collecting system utilization like memory, processor, hard disk usage. You want to see that because you want to know how heavily you're using the box, if you're overtaxing it, if you're not taxing it enough. You want to basically be able to look at what you have and figure out if there's a way that you can get more out of it. You don't want to waste resources on the box that you paid for, even if it's a VM or a physical box, you just want to make sure that it's there, that you're using all that you can out of it. The next thing you want to do, and by the way, your IT team should be able to generate these as a graphical type report, similar to the ones you see on the right, but theirs is going to look a little bit different, where you can basically look at utilization over a day or a week. And you're just looking for peaks and valleys and to make sure that that your peaks aren't steady at 100%. The next thing is you need to generate Cognos-based reports to measure your current utilization. In order to do this, you need to have audit logging turned on in your environment. All right? Audit logging is installed by default. There's a portion of the configuration that's done in configuration because you basically need to set up a database for the audit database, and you need to point Cognos configuration at that database. The second portion of that is basically going into the dispatcher configuration in Cognos administration and setting all of the logging to basic. By default, Cognos does not enable audit logging. So if you do not change from minimum to basic, it will not write to the database at all. So you can generate reports all you want, but if your logging is set to minimal, there will not be any database or any data in the database to report against. When you're doing reporting, the things to look at, this is just 5 things that we look at all the time, is the number of concurrent requests, and we do it by day of month, we do it by time of day occasionally. You want to look at the number of user logins, because that usually indicates that there's stuff going on the system. You want to look at a comparison of the batch versus the report instances in your environment. And that's that pie chart in the bottom right-hand corner, as well as the stacked chart at the bottom there. So like these basically help you figure out a few things. They help you figure out, you know, should I be scheduling my batch reports for a different time of day? You know, if we have almost no usage at night, should my batch reports be running at night? That kind of stuff. But they also say, listen, 85%, in this case, 70%, 75% of my usage is report instances. So I should tune my processes to take advantage of this. You can also generate reports that tell you what the report usage is for the environment, and this can help you do some trolling and basically some tuning of what reports you keep around. All right. Once you have those metrics, you can tweak your peak and non-peak hours to match your usage. So if you saw how the batch versus report stack graph looked, what I noticed was that basically from about 7 in the morning until 5 at night, the interactive reporting or the report services went up. So what I want to do is set my peak to match what the usage profile is in my environment. In this case, peak is going to begin at 0700 and it's going to end at 1700. I can also tweak the maximum number of processes between batch and report services to match my load. So during the night, I may only have 1 report service running or 2 report services running. And I may have 4 or 6 batch reports running at night, but during the day, I may split that more evenly. So say I have 8 processes total. I have 2 report processes running at night and 6 report processes, or 6 batch processes running at night. And during the day, I may go 4 and 4 because it looks like my usage is more even during the day. One of the things the report should also tell you is if your dispatchers are actually balancing the load. So your report should basically have a breakdown of how many requests are received and processed by each dispatcher. And what you're looking for is not necessarily a 50-50 split, but what you're looking for is one dispatcher handling 85% of the load. That usually indicates that there's something wrong, that the load balancing inside of Cognos is not doing what it needs to do. So you want to make sure that you're looking at that sort of stuff to make sure that it gets balanced out as time goes on. There's a lot to tuning. There's a lot to performance tuning, and I like to say that performance tuning is not, it's not an event, it's really a process. Because as you do performance tuning and as you work with environments, you'll find that you remove one bottleneck and it pushes that bottleneck downstream. So say we fix a dispatcher issue and it pushes the issue down to a data source. Or we fix a dispatcher issue and all of a sudden the throughput goes up and the weight goes down, but now the memory and the processor utilization go up significantly. We can help with that. We've done hundreds of health checks and capacity plans for a number of clients across the U.S. And we can definitely help you do that at any time. On top of that, Ironside Managed Services can do performance tuning each quarter. And we try to do that with each of our clients depending on their requirements. So feel free to reach out. And also you have my email in this thing. Feel free to just reach out and ask questions if you have them. Are there any questions?
All right, Eric, a couple questions came in during your presentation. First one is, how do I tell if Cognos is properly using my hardware?
All right, so this goes back to the conversation we had about looking at the IT reports on the system utilization in your environment. Your IT department should be collecting system utilization information. If they're not, you can use every product, every operating system has the ability to do that. What you should be able to do is pull that and basically turn it into a graphical form and look at it. Like I was saying earlier in the presentation, what you're looking for is peaks and valleys in the usage, and you're looking for it not to peak out at 100% for an extended period of time, because that typically indicates that you're underutilized, or not to trough out at a really at zero utilization for a long period of time. That usually indicates that you're underutilized. And you know, the reality is, in some environments, you may not use all of your hardware because you may be designed for specific levels of resiliency, right? So when I say that is, you may have 2 servers that are 2 processors each, but you really only need one that's 1. And some of that is in place because you have a requirement to have a failover in case of an issue. But you should be, like I said, you should be able to get that information from your IT team, or you can find a way to collect it from the operating system that you're on.
Thanks, Eric. What can I do if long-running reports are causing a backup of reports on my server?
So this goes back to the reporting on basically looking at the dispatcher distribution of reporting. Everybody's had Cognos environments in the past where one user writes a huge job that basically just pulls all, like a select of all the data in the database and pulls it back to their machine as a spreadsheet. And it takes hours and hours to run. And in the process, you end up queuing 10 or 15 reports behind that. There's actually an advanced setting out there that you can find. It's called the in-process request factor. And all you have to do is do a search on it. It's in one of IBM's documents on advanced routing. You can basically use that in-process request factor to basically make the load balancing in Cognos a little bit more intelligent. So typically the way Cognos balancing works is it does a weighted round robin. And so what you do is you say, listen, this server is worth 1, this server is worth 1. So it just goes back and forth. But the in-process request factor actually does something a little more advanced. What it does is when the dispatchers check in, they say, I'm online and I have this many items in my queue. And basically what the in-process request factor does is it takes the dispatcher with the lower queue, the shorter queue, and it allocates reports to that. So in-process request factor is a good way to basically tune out some of the long-running reports that you run. And obviously there's other things you can do. Governance and making sure people don't write reports that are bogging down your system is another step to that, and that's important as well. But the in-process request factor will help you as well in those situations.
Do your managed services cover performance tuning of other IBM technologies?
So the answer to that question is yes. Right now, we are hosting and managing environments including InfoSphere Information Server, Cognos TM1, Cognos Controller, Cognos BI, SPSS, and even some pure data for analytics. And we actively do performance tuning on all of those environments as part of the services that we offer there. And again, we don't only do managed services there, but we can help you with a health check along those lines as well to look at those environments for you and help you figure out how to do it better. And when Ironside does a health check on one of these environments, they don't just do the architecture and the platform, but they'll come in and they'll look at the entire solution from top to bottom. So in a BI instance, we'll do like an assessment of a few of your report models, an assessment of your actual reports and usage and things like that. So you get the full gamut when we come in and help you out with a health check.
Eric, those are all the questions that came in, but I know we have a special offer for today's attendees.
Yeah.
Yes, so if you want to learn more about Ironside Managed Service offering, you can download our solution brief. The solution brief will be available with the webinar replay in a couple of days, and that will be emailed out to you. In that email, there'll also be contact information should you want to speak to someone directly for additional information.
All right, that looks like we don't have any more questions, so we're ending a bit early, about 30 minutes early for you guys. If you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to reach out to Eric. His email is eromanek@ironsidegroup.com. We will be emailing you out a service brief as well as a replay and the PDF deck within a couple of days. So stay tuned for that, and thank you again for joining us this afternoon.